Hello and welcome. My name is Larry Arnn. We're here in the Richardson Heritage Room of the Mossy Library of Hillsdale College. This is a series of discussions of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States and the connection between them, which I argue is very tight. And this first one concerns the Declaration of Independence, its key terms, and how one is to understand them. Please watch. Welcome to Hillsdale College. Hillsdale College was founded in 1844 with the principles of civil and religious freedom and intelligent piety as its purposes. Civil and religious freedom are the purposes of the United States of America. And we were founded in loyalty to the principles and institutions of the United States of America, and we've always taught them here. In the great wars of America, our students have always rallied to take part in those wars in loyalty to those principles. We have that loyalty today, and of course we're an academic institution, and that means we have to study them. We have to raise questions about them. We have to ask about them. And what we're going to do in these 5 lectures is try to explain what those principles are. I'm going to argue the very radical thing that the American Republic's meaning and proper method of operation is to be found in 2 documents, in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. That's about 5,000 words of text. That's not very much. You can probably read 200 words a minute or something like that, so you can read them in a few minutes. They're simple, they're beautiful, they can be understood and be retained. We think the Declaration of Independence formed the Union and its purposes, and the Constitution sets up its form of governments, and we think, I think, that those 2 things are something more than compatible. They are necessary to each other. That's very controversial, and I'll say a minute about what I'm leaving out in these lectures. But what follows, if this is true, is that a human being is a certain kind of thing and requires to be treated in a certain way. A human being is a thing that has rights, and those rights are inalienable according to the Declaration. You've got to respect them. And it also follows that given the kind of thing a human being is, government needs to be organized in certain ways. And we think, I think, that that is the argument of the American Revolution. Now, this is an introduction. And there are going to be 5 of these or so. And we're going to stick to telling the story of those 2 documents as the primary text. And I'm going to quote from things that are written mainly by people who prepared those 2 documents. And those are, I think, the authoritative things. But I should mention what I am leaving out, because there's not time, and we don't leave it out here at Hillsdale College. So you can learn more if you want to. There's going to be means for you to do that if you want to. The first thing to mention is the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution have always been controversial. The Declaration was, of course, resisted by the people who didn't want to break with Great Britain, who thought the king, some of them thought the king had a natural title to rule, and the Declaration of Independence says otherwise, says nobody has such a title. And the Constitution was resisted by a bunch of people who thought it was going to make a government too strong and powerful at the center. And one can read those writings of those people in the Anti-Federalist Papers, which are very voluminous. And those representative samples of those Anti-Federalist Papers are, of course, in our Constitution reader, which you can buy to go along with watching these lectures. And that reader is made up entirely of original source documents that concern all the great controversies about the Constitution and the Declaration from their beginning and up to the current day. I should mention that the second great controversy came during the Civil War, when a lot of people began to argue that the Declaration of Independence was wrong, because it's not true that all men are created equal, not true that that should be applied to people who are black. Slavery was a good thing, they argued. And the Constitution is wrong because if it is attempting to prevent that, then it's doing something terrible. So you have to read about that. And the third controversy really about the Constitution, the third big one, is really going on today, and it's been going on for a long time now. And that controversy concerns the claim that the Declaration of Independence is wrong about a certain word we're going to study. I'm going to show you some words in a minute, and you'll know what we're going to try to learn in these lectures. That word is nature. and that nature is not really the commanding conception. History is the commanding conception. Everything develops and evolves. And if that's true, then there aren't any such things as laws of nature and of nature's God. And if that's true, then the arrangements in the Constitution might have been good for the time in which they were written, but they've got to be abandoned now. And of course, in our country, they are extensively abandoned. And on that argument, and the main people who invented that argument are represented in our Constitution reader, and we're going to spend a little time on them at the end, but they're there, and they're very powerful, and they command probably most academic opinion. And so one needs to know about that as we start. And we'll be mindful of those things. But my own view is the way to get to the bottom of that big argument about whether these things are good or not is to begin by trying to understand these things. And these things are very worth understanding. In fact, the work of understanding them is very exciting. We love it here. We have a great time with it. I should mention one more thing that's kind of left out that people get when they come to school here, and that is to really understand the claim that there is such a thing as the laws of nature and of nature's God, to really understand that all men are created equal, or that there is such a thing as a self-evident truth, it'd be really handy to have what we call here, and it has been called in a great tradition, very old now, a liberal education, which is the kind of education that teaches you what the big things are, what the stuff is at the top of the hierarchy that we see in nature around us, why we regard it as being in the top, and what it's like up there at the top. And that's a very good thing to have, and the most efficient way to get that is to come and spend 4 years here as a full-time student and stay up all night and cram and write papers. There are some here in this room who do that or have done that. And it's very intense, and you human beings get on by conversation. They're the only beings on earth capable of conversation. And liberal education very much involves that. And here at Hillsdale, it involves that. We can't do that for you in this mode, but you're invited to visit. And I imagine that there are going to be more lectures like this, so you can work your way through some of the main things over time, which, as I repeat, is a very joyous thing to do. So I say that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution go together, and I say that they can be summarized simply. And the purpose of this paper right here, written by somebody with a good, clear hand, I'll confess to you all, I wrote an earlier version and they deemed it unfit. These are the things to know, right here on this paper. And these things up above this line, these are principles. These are conceptions. And we're going to spend time on these today for about 20 minutes, whatever time remains. And I think we can get through them and get some idea of what they mean. These are arrangements of government. And these, I argue, are the key arrangements underlying the Constitution of the United States. It's obvious, by the way, that they underlie the Constitution. And what we're going to spend more time talking about in other lectures is why they do that. But, you know, the Constitution is organized to be a representative government. We elect people to go. We don't do the government ourselves. We don't meet and pass laws ourselves. We elect representatives. And everybody in the government of the United States is elected or appointed directly or indirectly from the people. And obviously, the Constitution of the United States implements separation of powers. Its structure is built around separation of powers. One article for each branch, one article for the states. And then finally, the Constitution of the United States sets up a limited government. And that limited government just means it can't do everything it wants to do. And that's obvious in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, for example. What's less obvious is that these things are also all present in the Declaration of Independence. And they are, in the Declaration of Independence, justified by these principles. Now, that's a very controversial thing to say. Very much of contemporary history is built around the argument that that's not true, that the Constitution and the Declaration are very different documents serving different purposes. They love the expression, many historians, there were two American revolutions, one in 1776, one in 1787, one with the Declaration, one with the Constitution. But I believe that that's silly on its face. And I believe it, you can see it by reading the Declaration of Independence. And that you will see if you read, for example, the charges against the king in the middle of the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is about 1,300 words long. And the beginning of it is a set of beautiful universal principles. And the end of it is a legal pronouncement that now we're going to be an independent country. A pronouncement, mind you, sealed by the people in the room there in Independence Hall in Philadelphia, mutually pledging to each other their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. It's a wartime, a battlefield proclamation. Thomas Jefferson is promising John Adams, and John Adams is promising Thomas Jefferson back. Everything we've got is at stake in this. We're not going to quit on this thing. We're signing an act of treason. And so that's the end of it. And remember, by contrast, the beginning is very universal, and I'll talk about how odd that is in a minute. But in the middle, there are these charges against the king. They make up about half of the length of the Declaration of Independence. And what he has done is failed to provide government. He has, one historian says that the Declaration of Independence treats government as an alien force. It doesn't. In fact, in no line does it do that. In fact, what it says is the first charge against him is he has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary to the public good. But then immediately goes to he has disrupted representative institutions, and these representative institutions are said to be necessary and essential, and people have a right to them. And he has, by being the executive branch, the king, he's messed around with the legislature and with the judicial. And so he's breached separation of powers, and the king has breached the right of limited government, which is, by the way, necessary if you're going to have representative government in ways that I'll explain later. You can't have representative government unless there's a big, strong, independent, vibrant society that can be represented and that is independent of the government that represents it. You have to have that, right? And the Declaration very much, it says in a famous passage in the Declaration, he has sent among us a swarm of officials to harass our people and eat out our substance. It says that he has sent foreign troops among us in no way answerable to us, to oppress us. He makes us pay for those troops. He taxes us without our consent. In other words, the government is now unlimited, it can do whatever it wants, and that won't do. And that's all in the Declaration of Independence. And it's in the Constitution more richly and in detail, and as we'll see, with marvelous sophistication. But it's there in the Declaration too, because that's what they're saying the king did wrong, and because he did these things, these acts that violate these things, these are also violations of these things. And because they're violations of these things, we are justified to kick him out and throw off him and make a government that we like better, to operate only with our consent. And if you think about that for a minute, that makes these things very important. They're not just a bunch of verbiage at the beginning. Why is it even there at the beginning? Why does the Declaration, which ends, remember, in support of this Declaration, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. That comes down to the individual men in the room, right? They themselves, in particular, their names on the bottom of the document, right? That's the particular ending. Why is the beginning so universal? Why is this here? When in the course, that means any time in history of human events. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people, that means any people, not these people in the room, not the American people, not any people in particular, any people who ever lived, in principle, are entitled, it says, to a separate and equal station under the laws of nature and of nature's God. It begins very universally, and that's handsome and pretty, but if you think about the structure of the Declaration, those principles command these things. And that means these principles are important. They're describing a way of living. And if the principles are true, government needs to be organized this way, in the way that is said by the Constitution. That's the argument. Now, there's variability possible in the forms. In fact, the Declaration says they can institute new government according to such forms as shall seem to them most likely to affect their safety and happiness. But the flexibility apparently does not extend to these matters. And these are the matters that give the main purpose and structure to the Constitution of the United States. So I'm arguing that there's a coherent thing here, and it can be understood. And if it's understood, then you have to decide about this whole thing together. If this is true, this follows. If this doesn't follow, this is not true. That's the argument, I think, of the founding of America. And if it's true then that that's the structure of it, then it's worth it to try to understand these things up here at the top. And, you know, you just run into the most terrible difficulties. And I can't settle them all here in the time that we have, but I can tell you what the argument is, I think, and it's very beautiful. And I invite you to think about it more. There's things to read about this in our Constitution reader, and of course in the great books. There are so very many things to read about this. And one could spend his life doing that, and if he didn't watch any TV, he'd have a double gain. So start with nature. What does it mean, the laws of nature and of nature's God? The Declaration begins, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands that have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. And there's a problem with nature, right? Like the Congress, you know, these days, the Congress passes very big, long, very complex bills, and, you know, nobody really reads them because they can't be read. But at least they can be found. You can look them up, and, you know, you can read them, really. It's just, why would you? Where would you look up these laws of nature and of nature's God? Well, you can't go look them up anywhere, except in some really great books. And also you can think about it. Nature comes from the Latin word for birth. If you think about it for a minute, the nature of a thing is what that thing is born to be. That applies to living things. Of course, an inanimate thing, a chair, a table, a podium here, they could do this easel, they have a nature. It's the nature of it to do certain things. But among living things, they're born to do these things, and they have a process that they live through. Little babies are small, and they grow. It takes a long time. Human babies take, by the way, they're very odd in nature because they take so long to grow up. They take so much care. It's one of the reasons why the family is a natural thing among humans, because there has to be this transfer of wealth going on between the middle-aged to the young and to the old, by the way, because when we get old, we need a lot of care too. And so the family is implied in that thing. Well, that's something about the process of begetting and growth by which things come to be. And we're going to see in a minute that this word nature and this word equality are very closely connected. Because whatever is the nature of a thing, whatever it is that gives it its specific nature, that is the respect in which it is equal to every other thing of the same kind. Now, I want you to remember that this is kind of obvious. If you plant an acorn, it's terribly unlike an oak tree. It's just a little old bitty pod of a thing, right? And an oak tree is this very grand, huge thing. Well, you would be astonished if you planted the acorn and an oak tree didn't come up, because they share the same nature. If you planted a pine cone, I guess that's what you plant, then you expect a pine tree to come up. And if it doesn't, something astonishing has happened, right? And by the way, you can tell a pine tree just by looking at it. I'm not very good at plants. My wife is really good at plants. And we have professors here who are just super good at plants. But never mind, I can tell a dang pine tree and an oak tree. And why? You can just see them. Well, the same way, you can see that a thing has a nature by looking at it. And that is the respect in which one thing is equal with another. Now, this equality thing is difficult to grasp because, like, I work here at Hillsdale College, and we have 1,400 students, and they vary. They're all smart, and they're all hardworking, and they're all good-looking, But we've got one of them playing offensive left tackle in the NFL now. He's a real big boy. He's not real big. He's huge. He's a massive boy. And all our kids are smart, but one of them did a thing that's very unusual. She wrote a paper when she was a junior. She was later valedictorian of her class. And the people in the English department, a couple of them have told me, that it's about the best thing they ever read about an Elizabethan poem that a lot of writing has been done about, and that she discovered things in this that nobody had ever seen before. And they just read that paper and their mouths drop open, right? Well, that girl's just very good at words, right? She's just a very smart girl and works hard and does well. She's a school teacher now. She's not equal, right? They're all different. And they don't look equal. I mean, for example, if you put this boy with his 6'8" and his 330 pounds up beside this girl, who's an attractive young woman, slender, they don't look the same, right? And the thing that you notice when you look at them is how different they are. But then, on the other hand, look a little wider. The argument goes, I'll tell you what the classic argument is about the nature of things and about the being of things. The classic argument goes this way, and it's very well known to the people who wrote the Declaration of Independence. The classic argument goes that the nature of the thing is obvious in comparison to things with a different nature. And in the Declaration of Independence, there is such a thing. God is mentioned 4 times in the Declaration of Independence. And he's mentioned first as the maker of the laws of nature and of nature's God, a legislator. He's mentioned second as a creator, kind of like a founder, I think. He's mentioned the 3rd time as the, I always get the 3rd and the 4th confused, which comes first, but I'm pretty sure that the 3rd one is the supreme judge of the world, the judicial branch. And then finally is divine providence, executive branch. God is a very great being, and the implication of the mentions of God is that if he were going to govern us directly, but he doesn't, he leaves us free, you could put all of the powers of government in his hands. And that would be safe. But of course, King George III is not God. He is a man. And doesn't matter who his father was, doesn't matter in what opulence he lives, doesn't matter how grand everything is around him. He is not like the being God. He is the same kind of thing we are. And if you just imagine God, and you can do that, by the way, it's pretty easy to do that. All you got to do is look at a rock, and then look at a dog, and then look at a man, and ask yourself what would be the next step. Because you're kind of making an ascent there, aren't you? Whatever is the perfection in man, or the excellence in man, that makes him different than the beast, imagine that thing perfected and unalloyed by any other quality, and you have a picture of God. In fact, you have sort of Aristotle's picture of God. Thomas Aquinas, too, except some elements of faith get added there that are very important. So you see, you can see the nature of man and the equality of man by comparing man to the things above. But also, you can see the nature of man and the equality of man by comparing man to things below. One of my favorite stories, because I fly on airplanes way too much, is in 2001, I think it was, they admitted a hog on a U.S. air flight from Philadelphia to Seattle. The story goes, I've read about it in several newspaper articles, they conflict some, but it doesn't matter what's really true about this. Somehow there was a pig on this plane. The gate agent and the ticket agent, they both said, we don't really take pigs on our planes. And the lady said, the pig is my therapeutic pet companion. As I recall, the pig was named Charlotte. And the story from some of the passengers that got into the newspaper is Charlotte was given a first-class seat, and she didn't behave as others in first class did. She became upset. There were snout marks on the window. The snout of the pig found its way into the laps of various persons, and there was some turbulence, and Charlotte ran up and down the aisle squealing, and there was some incontinence involved. U.S. Air later pronounced, although I think the Federal Aviation Administration announced they don't care if pigs get on planes, an unusual failure to regulate, maybe they do it different now. U.S. Air said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. And the point is, if you take our big old boy, who's the NFL player, and put him on that plane, a lot of people would have left that plane talking about the fact that there was a huge, attractive, well put together man on the plane. But if the pig is on the plane, nobody's going to notice him, because the pig is a different kind of thing. And all of a sudden, if you take the most remarkable looking person you know and the least remarkable looking person you know and stand them up side by side, they look very different. But then if you put a pig in the picture, all of a sudden you can say, oh, look, it's the same thing, right? Because the being of a thing is involved in the nature of a thing, and a rational creature. And by the way, one of the things you should do if you study at Hillsdale College, and you know, we're going to do some more online stuff and you can learn more about this, but write down that it's a really great thing to do to try to figure out what the human faculty of reason is that makes us different from everybody else, because it's very handsome. It's a great thing to know. I happen to have a teacher who knows a lot about that kind of thing, and I enjoy knowing about it. And it's involved in this distinction between the kinds of beings. And since I mentioned a pig, I did it on purpose, I want to show you how this equality thing gets to working in American politics. And there's a story that involves a pig. Because you know, the forces that came up in America that began to say the Declaration of Independence is a self-evident lie, those forces wanted slavery. They wanted to treat slavery like a good thing. And the great conflict that caused the Civil War, over which the Civil War was fought, was whether slavery would be extended into the lands to the west. That is to say, and if you think about what those lands were, it's half a continent. Huge implications. Is slavery going to grow there? Is it going to be confined where it is? And as Lincoln would say, therefore placed in the course of ultimate extinction. I'm proud about this argument, by the way, because our college had a lot to do with this issue and was on the good side. The constitutional side, by the way, wouldn't interfere with slavery in the states where it exists, didn't have the power, but would stop it from spreading and thereby make sure it would eventually die. And one day, Stephen Douglas, in the Lincoln-Douglas debates, made the claim, I just don't understand Lincoln's position because I can take my property and I can take my hog into Nebraska, then a federal territory, and the federal government will provide a government to protect that property, my hog and my other property. So why doesn't it do that for my property and the slave? And Lincoln responds beautifully and logically in a way that shows what these words, nature and equality, mean. It means we can't really treat the Negro the same way we treat the hog. Have you in the South, Lincoln says, ever been willing to do so much? The great majority, South as well as North, have human sympathies of which they can no more divest themselves than they can of their sensibility to physical pain. In other words, Lincoln is saying, if you look at a man and you look at another man and one of them is black and one of them is white, they look different. But if you put a pig in the picture, now all of a sudden they look the same, because they are the same. And that's the reason why you can't own them like they're property. And he goes on to say, in the South, you in 1820 joined the North almost unanimously in declaring the African slave trade piracy and in saying that it would carry the death penalty to engage in the slave trade. But Lincoln goes on to explain, but it wasn't, you didn't think it was wrong or illegal or should be punished by death to bring a wild horse or a pig from Africa into the country. You can go trap them and bring them here all you want to. And the point is, Lincoln is saying, you know, and also you can't help but know that they're not the same thing as these horses and these pigs that you trap. In fact, Thomas Jefferson says in one of the last important letters he ever wrote in his life, that what the Declaration of Independence means is that some men are not born with saddles on their backs, nor others booted and spurred to ride them by the grace of God. Now that's powerful, right? Lincoln says you can sooner ignore a great physical pain, pretend it doesn't exist, than you can pretend that you don't know the difference between a man and a pig, because you do know it, and you can't help but know it. That's one reason why the Nazis would load people on cattle cars and ship them off to factories for their slaughter, just like slaughterhouses. But they didn't really like to talk about that very much. They were always trying to cover it up, right? And when they were later, after the war, when they were arrested, they didn't stand up and say, yeah, I did that and that was really great. That's not the way they talked. Why? Because they know. And if you know that, then you know that a fella 6,000 miles away in London, born of a great family, doesn't get to rule you as if you were a hog, to take your property and lead you around and do whatever you want to with it. That's what the Declaration of Independence means. And by the way, the point about this is that these arguments from nature and equality, they are self-evident. What self-evident means is saying all men are created equal. You can actually turn that word men in that proposition into the word X. You can put the word cup there. You can put the word dog there. You can put the word pig there. You can put the word angel there. Because each being of a kind is equal in respect to the thing that gives it its nature. And human beings are the rational creatures, and unlike hogs, responsible for their actions and cannot therefore be governed without their consent. And I'll just close by saying that that set of propositions, by the way, which is worth a long time of thinking about. You know, come visit and go to class. That set of propositions gives rise later to this set of arrangements in the government, both in the Declaration of Independence and in the Constitution. And if these things up here are true, then according to the argument, these things follow. And the United States of America was founded on that argument. And it's very beautiful. It was very widely shared. And of course, it is the argument according to which the greatest republic in history was founded. Thank you.